Chapter 1: The Iron March. The sky over Listen Ridge glowed a furious red. Columns of North Rhyos armor crawled across the plains like armored insects, their grav treads churning frozen soil into billowing dust. Governor Lyra Soren watched the feed from her command bunker beneath the assembly spire. 1,000 kilometers of no man's land were falling by the hour. The Directorate's invasion was everything the analysts had feared, and worse. "We've lost contact with the 8th Defense Cohort," a young officer reported. His voice was thin with disbelief. "The Directorate's 3rd Shock Army has broken through the Sala's Gorge." "That's the last barrier before Karen," Soren whispered. Yes, she had known this might happen, but watching the map turn red felt like watching her own blood spill across the console. "Madam Governor," said General Rin Tallis, head of South Rhyos Defense Forces. His uniform was scorched where artillery shrapnel had torn through his convoy the day before. "We must issue the evacuation order now. Charon is our final redoubt." "No," she said softly. "Not yet. There are still thousands of civilians in the highland settlements. We can buy them another day. Every hour we delay, we risk total encirclement. Voron's vanguard units are already bypassing our positions." She pressed her palms against the table, feeling the cold seep into her bones. All her life she had believed in the promise of unity, in the right of her people to choose their destiny. But now, destiny was a line of Directorate tanks stretching from horizon to horizon. "Earth Alliance, where are you?" "Governor," a comms officer cried out. "Incoming message from the Assembly Hall in Charon. They're demanding evacuation orders." "Open a channel," she said. Her voice did not tremble. "This is Governor Soren. Begin phased withdrawal to Charon. Priority to medical and civilian convoys. All rearguard units will delay the enemy as long as possible." The line flickered. Then she deactivated it. Silence. She raised her eyes to General Tallis. "How long before the Directorate reaches the southern lowlands?" 2 days at most." "Then that's how long we have to persuade Earth Alliance to intervene." He said nothing. They both knew the truth. Earth Alliance was weary. Just 2 years since the last Murnock incursion had left hundreds of thousands dead on human worlds. Their council would hesitate to spill blood on a distant frontier. But if they did not come, no one would stand between Voron and the annihilation of freedom on Rhyos Prime. Soren turned to the comms officer. "Patch me through to Earth Alliance Diplomatic Command. Priority override authorization, Delta level." The young woman looked up, stricken. "Madam Governor, Delta level is a wartime emergency channel. Are you sure?" "Yes," she whispered. "I am sure." As the cold dawn broke over Listen Ridge, the last defenders of the South began their retreat. The Iron March had begun, and only Earth could stop it. Chapter 2. The last line above the snow-racked plains of Rhyos Prime, a dozen refugee transports thundered through the dawn, their engines trailing fire across the sky. As each vessel crested the ridgeline toward Karen, anti-orbital artillery from the Directorate hammered at them in futile arcs of orange flame. Inside the assembly spire, Governor Lyra Soren stared at the flickering comms display, an endless stream of panic transmissions, last-minute reports, and casualty tallies. A part of her wanted to shut her eyes, to let the noise fall away, but she forced herself to listen to every voice. If she stopped listening now, she would never forgive herself. "Governor," the comms officer called, headset pressed tight against her ear. "Earth Alliance Diplomatic Command is responding, patching in." Lyra swallowed. Her throat was raw. She straightened her shoulders as the display resolved into the insignia of the Earth Alliance, the silver star over an arc of 13 worlds. A moment later, a man's tired face filled the screen. "This is Admiral Marcus Kell, Earth Alliance Council Liaison," he began without preamble. "Governor Soren, we received your emergency broadcast. I must advise you, the Alliance is not presently in a state of readiness for large-scale deployment." Her voice emerged steady. "Admiral Kell, with all respect, if you do not intervene, within 72 hours there will be no free government left on Rhyos Prime. Supreme Director Voron will complete his conquest, and every elected representative, every dissident will be purged. We are not asking for charity. We are asking for the promise you made when Rhyos joined the Earth Alliance Protectorate Charter." Admiral Kell exhaled. He looked older than his years, she thought. Deep hollows under his eyes, the gray at his temples almost white, a man who had buried too many soldiers on too many worlds. "Governor," he said at last, "our fleets are still refitting after the Galactic Concord Wars. The Assembly at Luna has not authorized an intervention force. Even if they did, the earliest projection for deployment is too late," she finished quietly. He hesitated, studying her through the link. "Nevertheless, I will present your request to the Council in emergency session." Lyra leaned in. "Admiral, I am asking you, begging you, not to let the memory of the Concord dead blind you to the living who still need saving." A flicker passed across his face. Perhaps guilt, perhaps memory. "I understand, Governor," he said softly. "Stay strong. Kell out." The screen went black. General Tallis rubbed a gauntleted hand across his eyes. "That is all we can do now." "No," she said, "we can still hold the line." He looked up. "Until when?" "Until the Earth Alliance decides it can no longer live with the shame of letting us die." He gave her a tired salute and left to organize the last convoys. Outside, dawn was crawling up over the Charon Basin, a vast crescent of frozen marshland and defensive berms, where the combined remnants of the Assembly Defense Forces were digging in. Thousands of refugees already streamed into the perimeter, their breath misting in the bitter wind. Orbital dropships landed in clouds of snow, disgorging crates of ammunition and the wounded from the retreat. Along the line, soldiers strung portable shield emitters, planted mine arrays, and built gun nests from plasteel and shattered concrete. A ragged band of defenders preparing to face the might of Voron's war machine. The Charon perimeter was born in that hour, and on the far side of the snowfields, hidden behind the advance columns, the Supreme Director's forces massed like a storm waiting to break. Meanwhile, aboard the Earth Alliance flagship Resolute, Commander Elias Dane watched the recorded plea from Governor Soren. The command deck was hushed. Even the bridge officers, hardened by years of fighting the Murnak, seemed subdued as the governor's words echoed across the screens. "You think we'll go, sir?" asked Captain Mei Yun, the ship's medical officer. She'd spent most of the Concord War elbows deep in triage and loss. Dane did not answer immediately. He looked out at the starfield, remembering the charred colonies he'd liberated too late, the children he'd carried from collapsed bunkers. In that memory, he found his answer. "Get the medical bays prepped," he said at last. "If the council won't order it, I'll file a declaration of conscience deployment myself." Mayun looked up sharply. "That's career-ending," he finished. "Maybe. But not as final as what Voron will do to them." A quiet moment passed. "Understood, Commander." Dane turned back to the stars, feeling something stir in his chest he hadn't felt since before the war. Resolve. Whatever the council decided, he would not let Rhyos burn. Chapter 3. The Charon Perimeter. Snow fell in gusting sheets over the Charon Basin, clinging to the makeshift bunkers and the armored hulls of grav tanks drawn up in a final, ragged line. At dawn, the first shells landed. The Directorate's artillery was relentless, waves of kinetic penetrators and incendiary bomblets hammering the perimeter with surgical cruelty. In the observation post overlooking the southern causeway, Sergeant Torrin Kale ducked as a barrage pulverized the outbuildings beyond the defensive berm. The shockwave rattled the plasteel plates bolted across the embrasure. "Status!" he roared over the comm channel. "Eastern sectors holding?" Came the clipped reply from Lieutenant Vara. "Second and Fifth Companies report heavy casualties but no breaches." The Directorate assault had come faster than any simulation predicted. Voron's shock divisions had driven down from the highlands in a matter of days, riding a web of prefabricated causeways and portable shield domes. Now, they pressed the defenders back to the last 20 kilometers of open ground before the ocean. If we lose Charon, it's over, Kale thought. There's nowhere else to fall back. He triggered the tactical uplink. A translucent map unfolded in the air, showing a red tide surging against the thin blue line of Assembly defenders. Every few minutes, another company marker winked out. Overhead, Directorate strike craft screamed through the snow squalls, loosing precision munitions onto supply depots and staging areas. Plumes of oily smoke rose into the pale sky. Sergeant, called Private Dennick, huddled beside a makeshift autocannon. "Command says fallback routes are compromised. Enemy armor is cutting across the Echelon marshes." Kale's jaw clenched. The marshes were supposed to be impassable this time of year, frozen solid but crisscrossed with hidden sinkholes, but Voron's engineers had laid causeways over the worst stretches in less than a week. "Tell them to hold," he growled. "If that armor gets through, Charon's finished." He switched to the battalion frequency. "All units, this is Sergeant Kale. No retreat, no surrender. We hold the perimeter or we die here." A chorus of weary acknowledgments crackled in his earpiece. No different than the Concord War, he thought, except this time, no reinforcements. In the command bunker under Charon's assembly dome, Governor Soren watched as her defense grid disintegrated by the hour. Reports came in of massed infantry advances, thousands of Directorate conscripts driving forward under the guns of their commissars. Waves of drones swept over the defensive lines, detonating themselves in the trenches. Outside the blast doors, the corridors were jammed with refugees. Families pressed shoulder to shoulder, children huddled in blankets. Every few minutes, another fresh group arrived from the north, their faces gray with cold and terror. "Governor?" General Tallis's voice was hoarse. "If the Directorate breaches the perimeter, we must evacuate you by shuttle." She turned to face him. "I will not leave this city." "Then at least authorize the destruction of remaining infrastructure, deny Voron anything he can use." Soren swallowed. "If I give that order, I am surrendering." She rested a hand on the comms console. "No, not yet. Madam Governor, if the Earth Alliance refuses to come, I will stay and die with my people. But I will not consign the survivors to winter starvation on the chance that Voron will spare them a bullet." The general looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The door alert chimed. The comms officer turned. "Governor, urgent off-world transmission, priority clearance." Soren's heart jumped. "Patch it through." The screen resolved into the face of Commander Elias Dane, his uniform rumpled, eyes shadowed but burning with purpose. "This is Commander Dane of the Earth Alliance 3rd Expeditionary Fleet," he said. "Governor Soren, we have authorization to intervene. Task Force Resolute has completed an emergency warp insertion and will begin orbital operations within 6 hours." Her breath caught. She pressed her hand to her mouth, blinking back tears. "You came," she whispered. Dane inclined his head, voice steady. "We don't abandon our own." A chorus of relieved gasps rippled through the bunker. Even General Tallis looked dazed. Soren squared her shoulders, feeling her resolve surge back like fire through frozen veins. "Commander, our lines are collapsing. I can hold no more than 12 hours without relief." "You'll have it," Dane promised. "I'm transmitting landing coordinates now. Marines will reinforce the perimeter and push back Voron's armor. Tell your soldiers to hold just a little longer." "They will," she said fiercely. "They will." Hours later, at the southern edge of the Charon perimeter, Sergeant Kale's battered platoon braced for what they believed would be the final assault. From across the white plains, Directorate armor crested the rise, sleek grav tanks and half-track troop carriers advancing in disciplined wedges. Kale thumbed the comm bead in his helmet. "All units, fire at will." The perimeter erupted, autocannons blazing, missile batteries screaming, infantry rifles spitting plasma bolts into the advancing tide. And still, Voron's divisions came on. Then, from above the cloud bank, the first streaks of blue fire fell. Orbital strikes. Kale looked up as an Earth Alliance cruiser broke through the storm cover, her hull glinting silver in the dawn. Lances of directed energy fire slashed the Directorate columns, turning grav tanks into incandescent wrecks. Dropships descended in clouds of flame, deploying Earth Marines in gleaming combat armor. A surge of elation broke over the defenders. "Alliance forces have landed," someone screamed over the channel. Kale felt laughter rising in his chest, a wild, incredulous relief he hadn't known he was still capable of feeling. He keyed the comm. "Perimeter to Alliance Marines, welcome to Charon." Chapter 4, The Siege of Charon. The days that followed the Alliance landing blurred into an unbroken cycle of attack and defense. Snowstorms swept across the Charon Basin, muting the shriek of artillery and the rattle of small arms. In that white void, the Directorate pressed every advantage. They attacked in waves, first armored columns probing the southern causeway, then infantry masses hurling themselves against the minefields and barricades. Each night, Directorate infiltration teams crawled across the drifts, planting satchel charges along the defensive berms. In the central sector, Earth Marines in powered exo-armor fought shoulder to shoulder with South Rhyos conscripts in patched flak vests. Day 2 of the siege, Sergeant Torin Kale emerged from his dugout to find an Earth Marine squad erecting a mobile shield generator. The Marine lieutenant, a towering woman in silver and crimson armor, saluted crisply. "Lieutenant Anaya Voss, Earth Alliance Marine Corps. My company's reinforcing your line." Kale returned the salute, noting the woman's calm focus, even as Directorate artillery pounded the ridge behind them. "Sergeant Kale, Assembly Defense Forces, you're just in time." Voss keyed her comm unit. "Forward observers confirm enemy armor regrouping northeast of your sector. Once they mass for a push, we'll launch a spoiling attack." Kale grunted approval. "If you need local guides, my squad knows every ditch and draw in this basin." Voss's helmet visor flickered. "Acknowledged. I'd welcome your expertise." Their eyes met. In that instant, Kale felt a kinship stronger than any treaty. Two soldiers who had buried too many friends to pretend war was ever noble, but who still refused to surrender. Night 4, in the dark hours before dawn, Directorate infiltrators breached the perimeter. They came in total silence, clad in thermal-dampening cloaks, their blades honed to monomolecular edges. Private Dennick woke to find a black shape crouched atop the berm, raising a charge toward the power conduit that fed the shield grid. Before he could shout a warning, a beam lanced from the darkness, an Earth Marine marksman dropping the saboteur in a single shot. Dennick scrambled to his feet, heart hammering, and realized half a dozen more infiltrators lay dead around the outpost. Out beyond the wire, Directorate commandos melted back into the storm. Day 6. By the 6th day, the perimeter was a wasteland. Scorched emplacements, shattered armor, and frozen corpses half buried in drifts. But still it held. Governor Soren walked the line herself, flanked by an honor guard. Wherever she went, soldiers rose and saluted, some with missing fingers, others swaying with exhaustion. "You are the wall between freedom and tyranny," she told them, voice hoarse from cold, "and you have never once faltered." Some wept openly, others bowed their heads, but in every face she saw the same ember of resolve. Day 7. At dawn, Directorate artillery fell silent. For an eerie hour, nothing moved beyond the snowfields. Commander Elias Dane and General Tallis studied the tactical displays in the forward command post. "They're pulling back to regroup," Tallis murmured, "or to bait us into a counterattack." Dane's eyes narrowed, or both. He glanced at the shimmering blue perimeter that separated them from annihilation. "Tell your soldiers to rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we take the initiative." Tallis looked at him. "Where?" Dane tapped the display over the Echelon Sea, a coastal region north of the Directorate lines. "Here. If we strike behind their supply corridor, we can break this siege for good." Tallis nodded slowly. "The first step toward liberation." Dane met his gaze. "No," he corrected softly. "The first step toward ending Voron's tyranny forever." That night, as the defenders crouched in icy trenches, a rumor spread like wildfire. The counteroffensive was coming. Chapter 5. Dawn over the Echelon Sea. The storm broke at midnight. Gale-force winds tore across the Charon Basin, sending sheets of ice hammering into trenches and shattered emplacements. The Directorate guns fell silent, unwilling to waste munitions in the maelstrom. In the command bunker beneath the assembly dome, Commander Elias Dane studied the tactical projection. Waves lapped at the glowing blue shoreline of the Echelon Sea, far beyond the northern edge of Voron's siege lines. "Forecast still holds?" he asked. The operations officer nodded. "Weather will clear within 6 hours, sir, long enough for our landers to make the drop." General Tallis folded his arms. "This is a dangerous gamble. If Voron diverts even a fraction of his armored reserves, your Marines could be overwhelmed before they establish a beachhead." Dane's gaze didn't waver, "which is why we strike before he can react." He turned to the comms officer. "Signal the fleet. Operation Tidebreak is go." Orbit above Rhyos Prime, the Earth Alliance fleet hung against the darkness like a constellation of steel. In the Resolute's launch bay, Earth Marines checked weapons and sealed their suits in grim silence. Overhead, the loading cranes maneuvered assault landers into position, their hulls glistening with condensation. Sergeant Torin Kale, transferred to the Marine detachment after the siege's first week, adjusted the straps of his combat harness. He'd never trained for orbital assaults. But after 7 days on the Charon line, nothing frightened him more than the thought of failure. At the head of the embarkation ramp, Lieutenant Anaya Voss raised her voice so every soldier could hear. Listen up. Directorate Command believes we're trapped behind the Charon perimeter. Tonight, we show them they're wrong. Her voice was steady, her eyes fierce. When the landers hit the beach, you move fast, you move together, and you do not stop until we've taken the causeways. The enemy thinks they own this world. We're here to take it back. A ragged cheer went up. Cale found himself shouting with them. The launch klaxons wailed. It begins, he thought. Pre-dawn. The Echelon coast. The Directorate supply hub at Port Echelon was a sprawling complex of fuel silos, logistics warehouses, and armored motor pools, never designed to repel an attack from the sea. As the storm clouds parted, the first wave of Earth Alliance landers streaked through the dawn like falling stars. Directorate picket ships scrambled to intercept. Ground-based flak batteries opened fire, peppering the sky with incandescent shrapnel. Sergeant Cale's lander lurched as a near miss rattled the hull. He braced against the bulkhead, his hands clenched around his rifle. 30 seconds, the pilot barked. So this is what it felt like, Cale thought distantly, when the first humans stormed the beaches of forgotten wars. The lander slammed into the surf with a bone-jarring impact. The ramp dropped, and the world exploded into chaos. The beachhead Cale followed Voss into waist-deep water, pulse cannon held high. Directorate infantry scrambled from their barracks, firing wildly as Earth Marines advanced through the shallows. Go! Go! Voss shouted, her amplified voice cutting through the cacophony. They surged forward in bounding rushes, Cale and half his squad laying suppressive fire while the rest sprinted up the dune. Beyond the ridgeline, towering fuel tanks burned, plumes of black smoke roiling skyward as Alliance gunships strafed the supply yards. A Directorate grav tank emerged from a hangar, turret swiveling to track the Marine advance. "Launcher!" Cale roared. Private Dennick, somehow still alive after the siege, dropped to one knee, firing a thermal warhead that caught the tank square in the drive array. The explosion punched a pillar of flame 30 meters high. Cheers rose along the line. Cale vaulted the last embankment and found himself in the heart of the supply depot. Directorate soldiers scattered before the Marine assault, some dropping their weapons, others fighting to the last. Within an hour, the port was secured. Midday, Consolidation Commander Dane landed with the second wave, striding across the blackened tarmac as Marines raised Alliance banners over the shattered control tower. General Tallis arrived moments later by dropship, his boots crunching over broken concrete. "You did it," he said, voice hushed. Dane inclined his head. "We did it. Voron's supply lines are severed." Tallis looked north, where Directorate convoys burned in columns of black smoke. "This changes everything," he murmured. Dane's expression was grim. "It doesn't end the war, but it ends the illusion that Voron's victory is inevitable." They stood side by side in the cold wind, watching the flames rise over Port Echelon. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, hope began to feel real. Chapter 6. The Charon Breakout. Winter came to Rhyos Prime like a blade. Within days of the Echelon landing, temperatures plummeted below -40. Blizzards buried roads and supply caches under meters of drifting snow. Electronics froze. Power cells sputtered. And Supreme Director Voron, furious at the loss of Port Echelon, committed the bulk of his reserves to a single decisive blow. He launched a massive counteroffensive, not against the main Allied foothold at Echelon, but behind it, encircling the Marine Expeditionary Brigade still holding the Sharon Highlands. It was a brilliant stroke, swift, brutal, and nearly invisible behind the storms. When the snow cleared, the 3rd Marine Brigade and their South Rhyos auxiliaries were cut off. 40,000 soldiers trapped in a killing ground. December 3rd, perimeter encircled, Sergeant Torrin Cale crouched in the remains of a Directorate prefab bunker, rubbing the frost from his visor. Lieutenant Anaya Voss knelt beside him, studying the tactical map. "2 armored divisions closing from the north," she said, voice hushed. "Infantry masses here and here. They're tightening the noose." Cale's breath steamed. "Any chance of relief?" Voss shook her head. "Fleet's still consolidating Echelon. No way to punch through in time." "So we're on our own." She met his eyes. "We've been ordered to withdraw to the southern ridges and prepare for breakout." He felt a sick lurch in his gut. Retreat through 60 kilometers of frozen wilderness under constant attack. Understood. December 5th, the retreat begins. At dusk, the Marines began their withdrawal. Columns of exhausted soldiers threaded down the ice-choked valleys, their breath pluming in the darkness. Wounded were loaded onto sleds pulled by grav mules. Every hour, Directorate artillery probed the columns, sending sprays of white-hot shrapnel through the snow. Sergeant Cale led a squad on point, scanning the ridgelines with thermal optics. In the blizzard, shapes seemed to loom everywhere, sometimes enemy scouts, sometimes just drifts of ice. Once, he stumbled across a frozen body half buried in a gully, a South Rhyos militiaman, eyes staring sightlessly up at the stars. Cale pressed gloved fingers to the man's forehead, a silent benediction, then moved on. December 6th, the ambush at Rime Pass. They were halfway to the ridges when Voron's vanguard struck. At Rime Pass, Directorate infantry poured down the slopes in waves, thousands of black-armored troops converging in a pincer attack. Cale's platoon dug in behind a collapsed bridge, laying interlocking fields of fire. "Hold the line!" Voss shouted, voice rising above the wind. "This is the corridor. If we lose this pass, we're finished." The night became an endless cycle of muzzle flashes, screams, and detonations. Twice, Directorate charges broke through the outer line. Marines met them hand-to-hand in the swirling snow, plasma blades flaring blue and white. Cale didn't know how many hours they fought, only that when dawn came, the pass was littered with bodies, and somehow they were still alive. December 7th, the breakout. On the fourth day, the shattered column reached the southern ridges. Overhead, Earth Alliance gunships screamed down the valley, strafing Directorate armor massing for the kill. In their wake, a narrow corridor of blasted ice opened, a fragile lifeline back to the lines. Commander Elias Dane himself landed at the forward fire base, his armor still scorched from a near miss. He found Voss and Cale crouched over a wounded Marine. "Lieutenant," Dane said, voice raw. "Report." Voss straightened, her face gaunt. "Sir, casualties exceed 50%. We've burned through 90% of munitions and nearly all medical supplies." Dane's eyes hardened. "Then this ends today," he keyed his comm. "All units, this is Commander Dane. Commence breakout. We leave no one behind." The final push. Under a sky black with smoke, the survivors of the Charon breakout moved as one. Columns of Marines, militiamen, and refugees advanced through the corridor, fighting for every meter. Directorate artillery thundered from the heights. Cale led his squad across a frozen lake, the ice cracking under their boots. Behind them, the last Directorate tanks advanced in pursuit. A missile screamed overhead, fired from an Earth Alliance dropship, and the lead grav tank vanished in a column of blue fire. Cheers erupted up and down the line. "Keep moving," Cale bellowed. By dusk, the first units staggered into the forward encampments south of the ridges. Medical teams rushed to receive them, and as the last stragglers arrived, faces hollow, eyes wide with disbelief, Voss and Cale collapsed beside a shattered barricade. "We made it," she whispered. Cale looked up at the stars, the ice crusting his eyelashes. "Yeah," he rasped, "we did." Aftermath. 3 days later, the 3rd Marine Brigade was pulled from the line, replaced by fresh divisions landing from orbit. Commander Dane watched them depart, filthy, gaunt, but unbroken, and felt a surge of pride so fierce it left him breathless. He turned to Governor Soren, who stood beside the command post, wrapped in a thermal cloak. "They held," she said simply. "They did more than hold," Dane replied. "They showed every free soul on this planet that Voron can be beaten." And as dawn broke over the Charon Highlands, the Earth Alliance began planning the final offensive to end the war. Chapter 7. The long march south. Winter began to thaw. In the weeks after the Charon breakout, Earth Alliance logistics shifted into overdrive. Dozens of fleet transports arrived in orbit, disgorging fresh divisions, armor regiments, and thousands of tons of supplies. The shattered 3rd Marine Brigade was rotated off the line to recover. In their place came the 22nd Mechanized and 5th Aerospace Assault Divisions, veterans of the Concord Wars, seasoned in urban combat and planetary sieges. For the first time since the Iron March began, Voron's forces were on the defensive. January 14th, the offensive begins. Commander Elias Dane stood on the observation deck of the Resolute, watching the invasion flotilla assemble below. Dropships, armor landers, and gunships filled the sky in a vast, coordinated ballet. He keyed the tactical link to General Talas on the surface. All units are green, Dane reported. H-hour is confirmed for 500. Talas's lined face filled the screen, eyes gleaming with something between exhaustion and elation. We've waited a long time for this. Dane nodded slowly. Let's finish it. January 15th, liberation of Diara Plain. At dawn, the Earth Alliance struck south along the Diara Plain, a vast stretch of farmland now pocked with Directorate fortifications. Spearheading the assault were heavy grav armor columns, Leviathan-class tanks that glided over the fields like steel leviathans. Sergeant Torrin Kale, recalled to active duty with a composite infantry battalion, rode the flank of one such column. The armored wedge punched through 3 layers of bunkers in a single day. By dusk, Diara City, the largest settlement north of the Directorate capital, lay liberated. Civilians emerged from basements and labor barracks, hollow-eyed and trembling. When they saw the Earth Alliance banners, some dropped to their knees in the muddy streets and wept. Kale climbed down from his carrier, feeling the numb ache in his bones, and realized he was crying too. January 18th, resistance cracks. Over the next week, Earth Alliance forces advanced with relentless precision. Voss's Marine Battalion executed rapid airborne insertions, seizing key highway junctions and supply depots. Earth Aerospace squadrons flew a constant rotation of close support sorties, hammering Directorate armor trying to regroup. Entire Directorate units, cut off and demoralized, began to surrender en masse. Commander Dane transmitted an open broadcast to all occupied regions. This is Commander Elias Dane of the Earth Alliance. You are no longer alone. The days of tyranny are ending. January 24th, the labor camp south of Diara. The advancing columns reached Facility Omega-9, one of Voron's largest forced labor installations. Marines breached the gates at dawn. Inside, thousands of prisoners huddled in frigid barracks, starving, sick, some too weak to stand. Governor Lyra Soren arrived with the second wave. She stepped from her lander and walked slowly among the survivors, tears slipping down her cheeks as they lifted emaciated faces toward her. "We're free?" a woman whispered, voice cracking. "Yes," Soren said. "You're free." She turned to Dane, standing behind her in his scorched armor. "Whatever else happens," she said softly, "this alone was worth every sacrifice." Dane nodded. Yes, it was. January 27th, the final push. With the southern corridor collapsing, Voron's remaining forces fell back to the fortified capital at Taraxis. But the old certainty of victory, the cold arrogance, was gone. Interrogated Directorate officers spoke of crumbling morale, of troops deserting by the hundreds, of civilian uprisings sparked by Earth's advance. In every liberated town, Earth Alliance medics distributed food, medicine, and comm units, broadcasting a single undeniable message: Rhyos Prime will be free. Epilogue of the March War. One night, as the columns halted to resupply, Sergeant Kale sat beside a cook fire with Private Dennick and Lieutenant Voss. Dennick stared at the embers, voice hushed. "I keep thinking, if we hadn't held that perimeter, if the fleet hadn't come." Kale didn't answer immediately. The wind blew across the plain, carrying the first stirrings of spring. At last he looked up. "We held," he said simply. He didn't say we survived. Not all had, but enough. And tomorrow they would finish what they started. Chapter 8. The Fall of Voron. February 4th, Taraxis approaches. The last Directorate stronghold lay in the mountains. Taraxis, a fortress city carved into basalt cliffs, its towers bristling with defense turrets and shield emitters. For decades, the Supreme Directorate had called it the Iron Citadel. Voron had ruled from within those walls, dispensing decrees and death in equal measure. Now, the Alliance had come to end it. Commander Elias Dane stood in the troop bay of his lander as it knifed through the freezing dawn. A dozen more landers fell alongside his, engines wailing like thunder. His voice came across the battalion frequency, steady and resolute. "All units, remember who we are and why we came. This is not conquest. This is liberation." Below, the spires of Taraxis loomed like the bones of a dead giant. February 4th, the assault begins. At Zo 600, the Earth Alliance began the bombardment. Heavy plasma lances cut gashes in the outer walls. Aerospace strike wings crippled Directorate shield relays. But Voron had prepared. As the first Marines hit the landing zones, The Citadel's hidden batteries emerged from armored vaults, firing with disciplined fury. In the confusion, Directorate infantry counterattacked, pouring through breach points in armored wedges. Sergeant Torrin Kale, leading the second assault wave, found himself pinned behind the burned-out hull of a Directorate crawler. "Lieutenant!" he shouted over the tactical channel. "They're flanking us from the east causeway." Lieutenant Anaya Voss keyed her comm. "Hold position. Gunships inbound." A moment later, a pair of Earth Alliance Thunderhawk gunships streaked overhead, missiles punching into the advancing columns. Fire and smoke roared skyward. "Move," Voss ordered. "Push into the breach." Kale surged forward, pulse cannon bucking against his shoulder. Around him, Marines advanced step by step, driving the Directorate back into the depths of the Citadel. Inside the Citadel corridors, once polished to obsidian perfection, were littered with debris and bodies. Directorate defenders fought from every barricade, but their fire was ragged now, disciplined only by fear. Commander Dane's squad advanced methodically, room by room. When they reached the central atrium, a vaulted chamber of black stone, they found Voron's personal guard assembled in grim silence. Dane stepped forward, plasma pistol leveled. His amplified voice carried across the echoing hall. "Supreme Director Kel Voron," he called, "you are ordered to surrender your forces and relinquish control of this city." A hush fell. Then, from the dais at the far end of the hall, Voron himself stepped into view. He looked smaller than the propaganda hollows, thin, sallow, wrapped in an immaculate gray uniform. His eyes were bright with defiance. "You think you've won," Voron said softly, "but this world will never truly be yours. You will leave, and it will return to order." Dane took another step. "Your order is built on fear and lies. It ends here." Voron smiled thinly. "Then do it." For an instant, no one moved. Then a Marine surged forward, seizing Voron by the arms. The Supreme Director did not resist. Outside the Citadel, as word spread that Voron had been captured, Directorate units across Taraxis began to collapse. Some surrendered in place, others threw down weapons and fled into the hills. By dusk, Earth Alliance banners flew from every tower. Governor Lyra Soren arrived by shuttle to find Dane waiting near the main gates, his armor scorched and pitted. "It's over," she said softly. Dane looked back at the smoldering spires. "It had to be." Soren nodded, her face pale in the cold wind. "Will you stay? Until this world is safe," Dane replied. "Then we'll leave it in your hands." She smiled faintly. "That's all we ever wanted." February 5th, broadcast to the planet. The next morning, Soren addressed all of Rhyos Prime from the Citadel's central balcony, once reserved for Voron's proclamations. Her voice carried to every settlement, every hidden enclave, every labor camp. "This is not a day of conquest, but of freedom. The Directorate is no more. From this moment forward, every citizen of Rhyos Prime stands equal beneath the law." In the command center behind her, Dane watched the feed and thought of the long march that had brought them here. The Charon perimeter, the frozen lakes, the endless nights of fire and despair, and he felt at last that it had been worth every sacrifice. The dawn after tyranny. As the sun rose over Taraxis, Marines lowered the Directorate banner from the tallest spire. In its place, they raised the silver star of the Earth Alliance and the azure pennant of the South Rhyos Assembly. And for the first time in living memory, the people of Rhyos Prime looked up and saw a sky unclaimed by fear. Epilogue, a star rekindled 2 months later. Spring thawed the snows of the Charon Basin. Where once the ground was churned mud and frozen corpses, green shoots now rose, fragile but unbowed. Everywhere across Rhyos Prime, work crews cleared rubble, repaired conduits, and scrubbed the Directorate insignia from walls. Children returned to schools that had been closed for years. Families reunited after long separations in labor camps and occupied cities. In the Assembly Dome, rebuilt from its bombed husk, Governor Lyra Soren addressed the first free assembly in a generation. "This is not the end of struggle," she told them, "but it is the end of submission." Her words were carried on relays across the planet. In every settlement, survivors lifted their heads, daring to imagine a future no longer dictated by one man's ambition. Earth Alliance Redeployment Zone, Charon Plains. Rows of Earth Alliance dropships stood ready to depart. Sergeant Torrin Kale walked the embarkation field with Lieutenant Anaya Voss and Private Dinnick, all three clad in the worn combat armor that had carried them through the siege and the breakout. Kale rested a gloved hand on the hull of a waiting transport. Feels strange, like we're leaving something unfinished. Voss shook her head. Not unfinished, just passed on. He looked at her. To them, she said, nodding toward a convoy of South Rhyos militia trucks rumbling past. Fresh recruits, barely out of adolescence, raising new banners on their roll cages. Dennick let out a shaky breath. They'll hold it? Voss smiled faintly. We taught them how. Kale took that in. For the first time since the invasion began, he felt the knot in his chest loosen. Atop the assembly spire, Commander Elias Dane stood with Governor Soren on the observation deck, overlooking Charon's thawing expanse. Below, columns of Earth Marines marched to their transports. A dozen planetary relief shuttles hovered in landing approach, each bearing fresh medical teams, teachers, and engineers. You kept your promise, Soren said quietly. Dane's eyes were tired but calm. You kept yours first. She studied his face, the way the wind ruffled the tattered hem of his greatcoat. Will you be back? Only if you ask. She extended her hand. Then if ever we forget how to stand, you'll hear our call. He took her hand in his gloved one, shook it once, and let go. That's why we came, he said softly. Not to rule, to answer. Departure. When the last transports lifted into the dawn, their engines thundered over fields just beginning to bloom again. The people of Rhyos Prime looked up, shielding their eyes, watching the ships dwindle to glints of silver against the rising sun. In that moment, they were no longer subjects, no longer divided by fear. They were a people made whole. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the Earth Alliance fleet turned its bows toward distant stars, ready for whatever call came next.